mic's on and everything. Good morning. Isn't it fun to be back? In real live person. I'm Mary Laura Philpott, by the way. It's not on enough. Is it better now? Thank you. You get points for that. Thank you for telling me. I would have just kept going. I'm Mary Laura Philpott. Still not enough? We would like more sound on the mics, I'm hearing. Thank you. Thank you to Hannah in our sound box back there. Thank you to the Nashville chapter of the WNBA for having us this morning. Thank you to the sponsors and volunteers for the Southern Festival of Books. Thank you. All the wonderful support that you give to Humanities Tennessee helps make this an event that we can have for a 3-day weekend completely free. And I've been told to tell you that you can now Venmo money directly to Humanities Tennessee. So feel free to just get your phone out. Look, I think the handle is HUMTN, and just give them all your money. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our guests. I'm going to start at this end. This is Annie Hartnett. Annie lives in Massachusetts. Her book is Unlikely Animals. It is basically what I'll tell you is these are my favorite books of this year. So I'm going to go, it's one of my favorite books of the year because they all are. But this was one of the ones that I had the most fun trying to describe to people. I would say, you've got to read this book. It is so good. It's narrated by these ghosts who live in a graveyard, and people would start walking off, and I'd go, wait, no, come back. I have gotten better at describing it, but you probably can describe it even better, and I will give you a chance to do that in a moment. It is her second novel. If you haven't read her first, Rabbit Cake, it is also fabulous. Next to her, we have Jennifer Close, my good friend who lives in Washington, D.C. Her book is Marrying the Ketchups, which is not about a wedding in a family called the Ketchups. Marrying the Ketchups is a thing you do when you work in a restaurant. At the end of the night, you put all the ketchups together. I didn't know, but now I do. It's a fantastic book. Is this your fourth novel? That means when you read this one and you love it, you can go back and read 3 more, which is wonderful. You get that binge reading experience. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Then we have Shelby Van Pelt, author of Remarkably Bright Creatures, half narrated by an octopus. If you are like me and you need to know, the octopus does not come to any violent situation in the pages of the book. So don't be afraid, like I often am. I'm like, I can't read a book with an animal because something might happen. It's cool, you can read it. Remarkably Bright Creatures was a Read with Jenna pick on the Today Show. So that was your getting shot out of a cannon first debut novel experience. And then right next to me, we have Taylor Harris. She is the author of a memoir. I'm happy to have another memoir writer up here, thank you, called This Boy We Made, which I have been a fan of yours since you started writing for Catapults online years ago. I remember reading a piece you wrote and just loving your voice and your style and thinking I would follow you anywhere. And so I followed you all the way to this book coming out. Will you hold that up? I think this is one of the most beautiful covers I've ever seen. Doesn't it kind of grab your eyes from across the room? Anyway, these are our wonderful guests, and we're going to have lots of fun with them today. The way this is going to work is I'm going to ask them some questions. Actually, first, they're going to do a little reading for you. Then I'm going to ask them some questions. Then I'm going to pass them my big bag of questions, and they're going to ask each other some questions. Then you get to ask questions. We are in here until about 11:15. And my goal is that by the end of this session, you know them as people, you have a sense of their books, you have become the kind of book fan where whatever they write next, you are going to read it. You're going to go up there and get your book signed. You know, in a few years, you're going to be telling your friends, oh, my friend Taylor has a new book out. And your friends are going to go, Taylor Swift? And you're going to say, no, Taylor Harris, my good friend that I met in Nashville. So I am a matchmaker today, just putting you all together. So first thing we're going to do, and we're going to start with Annie just because you're there and it's symmetry. If you would kind of give your little fourth grade book report on My Name is Annie and my book is Unlikely Animals and what it's about, and then whatever context you need to offer leading into your reading. Thank you.
Okay. Hi. Oh, I can hear me. You can hear me? Great. So Unlikely Animals came out in April. It's my second book. My first one was a lot easier to describe, so I'm still like 6 months in having trouble describing this book because it's just, I wanted to write like a sort of sprawling small town story. I'm very inspired. I love John Irving. He's my favorite writer probably. So Unlikely Animals, it's about a family who returns to, the daughter has been away at medical school. She was born with a slight magic touch in her hands, slight healing touch. So not enough to cure cancer, but enough to give her family hope that she's going to become this great doctor. So she goes to med school. She's just dropped out of med school, so she's coming home to this small town in New Hampshire, which is based on a real town in New Hampshire. And so a lot of the history in the book is true. She's come home to take care of her dying father, who he has a mysterious brain disease, and he has been hallucinating small animals, and he has also been experiencing these visitations and so his family thinks they're hallucinations, but it's there's some real history, and it's the ghost of Ernest Harold Baines, who was a naturalist who lived in this area this area of New Hampshire from 1904 to 1925. And he was a real-life Dr. Dolittle with animals living in his house. And so there's pictures throughout the book that I was able to take that are his pictures of him living with the animals. So he's a character, he's a ghost, but also a real person. And his real writing is in the book too, although since it's in public domain, the pictures, I'm able to collage it and play with it. And I found out when I was researching up there in New Hampshire that's not in any of his books, but he was quite the womanizer. And this was one way that he and his wife lived at the edge of this park in New Hampshire that's still there. It's 26,000 acres. It's this huge private hunting park that's been around there since 1886 that I found. And so it is there's just a lot that goes on in the book. But so I'm going to read you a section where the father who has the brain disease is talking to the ghost, Ernest Harold Baines. And so he's been hallucinating animals. And so all you really need to know is that Ernest Harold Baines was a real guy. He's a ghost in my book. And he is friends with Clive, who has a brain disease. And it's funny, so don't feel like you don't have to laugh, So. Clive woke from his afternoon nap to find the ghost of Ernest Harold Baines sitting at the edge of his bed. This was unusual, Clive thought. The ghost had never shown up in the bedroom before. Death must be coming soon. What a lonely thought. Clive bravely dragged himself out of bed anyway and noticed he'd been napping in his undershirt and undies. It was 2 p.m., but he threw on his bathrobe and slippers. He saw no reason to get dressed, with nowhere to be, no classes to teach. Clive and Harold went downstairs with Moses the dog on their heels, and they found the house was empty. Yet again, Moses was the only Starling family member standing guard. In the bright yellow kitchen of the Corbin caretaker's house, Clive poured out an afternoon snack. 3 bowls of cereal, one for him, one for Harold, and one for the fox, in case the ghost of Harold's pet fox decided to show up. The ghostly vision Clive had only seen once, standing at the edge of the woods that day, the day his daughter Emma had finally come home. Clive knew the fox was the creature that Harold loved most in all the world, but he never came around with Harold. Clive was a little miffed by it. Still, Clive was glad his friend had some company, since Harold had said his wife, Louise, wasn't with him in the woods. She went to travel the world after his death, Harold had explained. She'd outlived him by many years. She'd been a successful photographer in Europe and had ended up buried in Nova Scotia. She'd always wanted to be near the ocean. It made Clive awfully happy, he still had his own wife, to hear Harold talk about Louise. Clive went to put his cereal bowl in the sink, and he looked out the kitchen window onto the front lawn. There, in the midday sunshine, was a deer standing in the snow. "I'm sure she'd like a snack, too," Harold said. Clive agreed, and so he went out with a box of cereal. More corn pops from the starling's endless supply. When Clive extended the yellow puffs to the deer, he felt like he could read her mind. He felt like he knew everything about her. How glad she was to see him. Now, most deer would have run from Clive Starling. He was wearing a bathrobe and an undershirt and what Clive's students would call tighty-whitey underwear. But this particular deer was remarkably bold and had been fed by children before, had discovered the joys of the packaged foods available on the playground at recess time. The children at Dreamfar Elementary had fed this deer fruit roll-ups and peanut butter sandwiches, carrot sticks and Ritz crackers, and even, once or twice, a slice of ham. The children had the good sense not to feed the deer any chocolate items, since they knew that chocolate can kill a dog, so it could likely kill a deer too. So this particular deer, whom Clive Starling quickly named Bambi, as though he was a man with no imagination and not a professional poet, ate corn pops straight from Clive's palm. "That tickles, Bambi," Clive said. The deer had whiskers underneath her jaw. Clive Starling reached into the cereal box again. Boy, did he feel like a friend to all animals at that moment. He was inhabiting the spirit of the noble Harold Baines. If there is only so much life left in this skin, Clive thought, I am glad I have had this experience. And he looked the deer over lovingly. It was only then, he reported to everyone later, that he noticed that the deer was speckled with some kind of pearlescent paint. This deer, his Bambi, had been shot, but only by a paintball gun. Clive had heard about this, why someone would do this. The high school kids were into night hunting or flashlight hunting, which is illegal because a deer will freeze when you shine a light at it, and that unfair advantage makes it poaching, not hunting. The high schoolers had started shooting deer up with glow-in-the-dark paint in the hopes that they didn't have to use flashlights to find the deer at night. "Let's get you cleaned up," Clive said to Bambi. "I'll get a wet towel." And then Clive realized this was the ultimate test. Ernest Harold Baines had not only fed wild animals, he had lived with them, invited them into his home. Clive Starling did not stop to think of any of the consequences, what his wife might say. Clive Starling didn't think of his wife at all as he lured the deer into the house, one corn pop after the next corn pop. He walked backwards, and soon they were up the 4 porch stairs. Bambi took the stairs one by one, like she'd been walking stairs her whole life. And soon they were in the house. The poor dog ran upstairs to hide. Clive and the deer were in the front hall. Then they were in the kitchen. Bambi was standing in the kitchen. Bambi's back was as tall as the countertops. It struck Clive only then how large this animal was and how hooved. Why is that so funny? I don't know. It really is. Hooved. What a good word. "What the heck do I do now, Harold?" Clive said to the ghost, but the ghost was not around. Ernest Harold Baines was no longer at the kitchen table, and even Moses was nowhere to be seen. And then Clive remembered that he had to wash the paint off the deer. He poured the remaining cereal into a bowl and left Bambi munching away as he went upstairs to get a towel and some paint-removing supplies. In the bathroom cabinet upstairs, Clive found the thing he was looking for, nail polish remover with acetone. He knew this was the best thing to remove paint quickly. His wife had taught him that much. He splashed acetone on the towel and went downstairs toward the deer, the open bottle in one hand, the towel in the other. He wanted to clean her up quickly while he still had cereal left to feed her. It might have all worked out fine. But Bambi had lived long enough to associate certain smells with fear and otherwise bad feelings. What Clive Starling did not know, because he was not a gunman, had never been a gunman, was that acetone is often used in a homemade mixture to clean your gun. Many hunters in New Hampshire use a homemade mixture, and Bambi knew the smell of acetone. Clive could tell, as soon as he was face to face to her with her again, what she was thinking, and that he'd made a major mistake. In the sunny yellow kitchen of the caretaker's house of the Corbin mansion, Bambi went berserk. Thank you.
I know. There we go. That was so, I just want to hear the rest of the book, so that was nice. I left the hotel before I had coffee this morning, and so I forgot the copy of my book, so I'll be reading it from my phone. As Mary Laura said, Marrying the Ketchups, I saw some knowing nods, which makes me happy. When Mary Laura read it, when she finished, she admitted to me that she was waiting for the Ketchup family and the wedding to happen, and she was very surprised when I described what it is to marry the Ketchups. I have wanted to write a restaurant book for a long time. I worked in a restaurant in college and a little after, and I just think it's a fun place with lots of drama. And I love food writing, and so I just was waiting for the right time. I've been thinking about this book for a while. I knew I wanted to set it in Chicago, and I was working on it when the Cubs won the World Series, which I'm a big Cubs fan. And I thought, I'm going to include that. But if anyone remembers, what happened the next week was the election. So those two events are very tied in my head, and I knew once I wrote about the Cubs, I had to write about the election in 2017 in that funny time. So that also crept its way in. Did not mean for it to. Books are funny like that. And so I'm going to be reading a section of one of the grandchildren. So what happens at the beginning of the book is the patriarch of the family who started this restaurant dies, and the family's really rattled, and for different reasons, they all find themselves coming back. So this is one of the grandchildren, Teddy, who's worked in restaurants his whole life. He is back there. He is trying to move Sullivan's forward. He is trying to do his best for his family business, and he keeps coming into some problems. One is that his ex-boyfriend keeps showing up at the restaurant. So I think that's all you need to know before I read this section. Teddy hated the way he saw Sullivan's when Walter was there. He could only focus on the scratched bar and the worn carpets. He knew Walter thought the light fixtures were cheesy, the menu old-fashioned. He hated most of all that he felt embarrassed of Sullivan's when Walter was in it. Walter was seated in Anna's section, which made Teddy happy. Anna was a veteran waitress, a stellar server, so Walter would be seeing the best of Sullivan's. But when Anna saw Teddy in the kitchen, she lowered her voice and said, "Do you want me to spit in his food?" She laughed, and Teddy hoped to all that was good and holy that she was kidding. "No," he said firmly, just in case. She shrugged and picked up her order and left Teddy feeling mortified that the whole restaurant knew he'd had his heart broken. Teddy saw Anna clearing Walter's plate and noticed that Walter had hardly touched the chicken pot pie. There were flakes of crust around the plate, piles of filling everywhere, as if he were pretending to eat but hadn't taken a single bite. Teddy took this as a direct insult. Walter liked restaurants, but he didn't really like food. He was always amused at the way Teddy examined each dish, the notebooks he kept with menu ideas, the actual menus he kept piled at his apartment. "I'm not such a foodie," Walter said once, wrinkling his nose at Teddy's enthusiasm over a perfectly grilled piece of swordfish. And maybe Teddy should have known right then that things wouldn't work between them, because it felt lonely when Walter wouldn't try a bite of his fish or didn't finish the shaved Brussels sprout salad that Teddy made just for him. Teddy loved food, all of it. He loved seafood and local food and fast food. The taste of fresh basil could make him moan, but he also knew that an Oreo could brighten a particularly low day, that the artificial white cream could make things just a touch better. I believe that too. It's right from my heart. Teddy believed that food could cure anything: heartbreak, homesickness, the common cold. During finals in college, he used to make his mom's meatloaf recipe that called for cubes of Velveeta to be mixed inside. He swore the processed cheese made his brain sharper. It was comforting. It was home. Walter once watched Teddy make a casserole with canned soup and visibly shuddered. He didn't understand that there was room for everything: a veiny heirloom tomato sprinkled with salt, and sometimes also a Jell-O salad. For Walter, eating out was about being seen, saying you got a reservation at the hottest new restaurant. The only thing he ordered with glee was foie gras. He made fun of the years that Chicago tried to outlaw it, called Charlie Trotter an asshole for leading the charge against it. Teddy suspected that Walter didn't even like it that much. It was more that he liked the idea, that it made him feel powerful to have a part in force-feeding and killing a goose. It was the strangest thing to know that Walter wasn't a good person and to miss him anyway. "I'll see you soon," Walter said as he left. Teddy had the sense he was on some sort of hidden camera show. Walter was trolling him or catfishing him or mocking him for fun. Whatever it was felt really cruel. "I guess you will," Teddy said. Teddy prided himself on being an aggressively positive person, but these past few months had thrown him. The breakup made him worry that he'd never be happy again. "This won't last forever," Cindy told him, but what did she know? Weren't there some people who never recovered from heartbreak? Wasn't it possible he could be one of them? He'd grown up with a mother who was always angry, and sure, Gail had been dealt a raw hand with a husband who left her bankrupt with a 4-year-old, but her anger just seemed to grow and grow. Teddy loved her, but he was constantly afraid he was going to end up like her, someone who was angry at the cars on the road, cashiers who were slow, and the price of organic blueberries. That unhappiness was in his genes. He had to stay ahead of it. Teddy was trying. He went to SoulCycle and meditated. He scheduled extra sessions with his therapist. He read self-help books and placed inspirational notes around his apartment. He volunteered. He reactivated his online dating profiles. He considered getting a dog until he dog-sat his friend Matt's dog, Schnitzel the Schnauzer, and woke up to a fresh pile of shit in the kitchen each morning. Isn't Schnitzel a great name? I mean, I'm gonna have to use it at some, I just love it, yeah. I was very pleased when I got to name that dog. He quit his job. He tried to erase Walter, and Walter tracked him down. He was trying, but none of it was working. The worst part was that Teddy lost his appetite. He still ate, but it was all uninspired, a banana or a hard-boiled egg in the morning. For lunch, he'd slice and salt an avocado, wanting something that would slip down his throat without much effort. This won't last forever, he told himself. It can't last forever. In the meantime, he would go home tonight and fry 2 pieces of bacon. He would toast an English muffin and spread it with peanut butter. He would break each piece of bacon into fourths and arrange them just so on top, creating the perfect mix of salty and sweet. The crumbly bacon would melt into the creamy peanut butter. Don't knock it until you try it. That's a real note in the book, because I want people reading this to try it. It's delicious. He would pour himself a large glass of Cabernet and sit at his kitchen table and enjoy it. He would at least try. Thanks.
Are we on? Yeah. Well, I'm hungry now. I don't know about y'all. Stomach rumbling. Amazing. Well, I'm Shelby Van Pelt. My book is Remarkably Bright Creatures. As I like to say, as you can tell from the cover, it's a book about an octopus, but it's not really a book about an octopus. When I wrote the human characters in this, and the octopus character, who is named Marcellus, he's a captive octopus in an aquarium in a small town in Washington, fictional town. I really wanted to write a book about getting unstuck. I feel like all of my various characters are kind of stuck in their various ways. You have Marcellus the octopus, who is literally stuck, except when he makes his nightly little trips out to get into mischief. And then you have the human characters who really just are kind of on their various paths, unwilling to put themselves out there and make a change to change that path. And so it kind of became this story about kind of taking the reins of your own life, about how it's never too late to make a change or have a second chance, and really just a story about friendship, and in some cases sort of unlikely friendship. And so I'm going to read a section that's from pretty early on in the book, and the main human character is a woman named Tova, who's kind of inspired by my grandmother. She's an older woman. She is Swedish. She absolutely loves to clean. She always stays busy, no matter what, is just perpetually in motion, drinks a lot of coffee, which is maybe something I inherited from her. And it's funny, I was in a writing group and we were talking about opening scenes and what is happening in your opening scene, and having to describe that mine is a lady mopping, and how this actually worked, I hoped, and it wasn't as boring as it sounded. So In this scene, Tova is doing battle with a piece of chewing gum that has stuck itself to the floor and finally has her victory against it when she has an unexpected encounter. The chewing gum mounts a valiant defense against Tova's file, but eventually it pops off. When Tova pitches the crusty blob into the trash bag, it makes a satisfying little swoosh as it rustles the plastic. Now she mops again. Vinegar with a hint of lemon tinges the air, wafting up from the wet tile. So much better than the dreadful solution they'd been using when Tova first started, bright green junk that singed her nostrils. She'd made her case against it right off the bat. For one thing, it made her dizzy, and for another, it left unsightly streaks on the floors. And perhaps worst of all, it smelled like Will's hospital room, like Will being sick, although Tova kept that part of her complaint private. The supply room shelves were crammed with jugs of that green junk, but Terry, the aquarium director, finally shrugged, telling her she could use whatever she wanted if she brought it herself. Certainly, Tova agreed. So each night, she totes a jug of vinegar and her bottle of lemon oil. Now more trash to collect. She empties the bins in the lobby, the cans outside the restrooms, and then ends in the break room with its endless crumbs on the counter. Tova always runs her rag around the base of the ancient coffee maker and inside the splatter-stained microwave, which smells of spaghetti. Today, however, there are bigger issues. Empty takeout cartons on the floor. 3 of them. My word, she says, scolding the empty room. First the gum, and now this. She picks up the cartons and tosses them in the trash can, which, oddly, has been scooted several feet over from its usual spot. After she empties the can into her collection bag, she moves it back to its proper place. Next to the trash sits a small lunch table. Tova straightens the chairs. Then she sees it. Something underneath. A brownish-orange clump shoved in the corner. A sweater? Mackenzie, the pleasant young lady who works the admission kiosk, often leaves one slung over the back of a chair. Tova kneels, preparing to fetch it and stash it in Mackenzie's cubby. But then the clump moves. A tentacle moves. Good heavens! The octopus's eye materializes from somewhere in the fleshy mass. Its marble pupil widens, then its eyelid narrows. Reproachful. Tova blinks, not convinced her own eyes are working properly. How could the giant Pacific octopus be out of his tank? The arm moves again. The creature is tangled in the mess of power cords. How many times has she cursed those cords? They make it impossible to properly sweep. You're stuck, she whispers. And the octopus heaves his huge bulbous head, straining on one of his arms, around which a thin power cord, the kind used to charge a cell phone, is wrapped several times. The creature strains harder and the cord binds tighter, his flesh bulging from between each loop. Eric had a toy like this once from a joke shop, a little woven cylinder where you had to stick an index finger in each side, and when you tried to pull them apart, the harder you pulled, the tighter it became. She inches closer. In response, the octopus smacks one of his arms on the linoleum as if to say, "Back off, lady." Okay, she murmurs, pulling out from under the table. She stands and turns the overhead light on, washing the break room in fluorescent glow, and starts to lower herself back down again, more slowly this time. But then, as usual, her back pops. At the sound, the octopus lashes again, shoving one of the chairs with alarming force. The chair skids across the room and ricochets off the opposite wall. From under the table, the creature's impossibly clear eye gleams. Determined, Tova creeps closer, trying to steady her shaking hands. How many times has she passed by the plaque under the giant Pacific octopus tank? She can't recall it stating anything about octopuses being dangerous to humans. She's but a foot away. He seems to be shrinking, and his color has become pale. Does an octopus have teeth? "My friend," she says softly, "I'm going to reach around you and unplug the cord." She peers around and sees exactly which cord is the source of his predicament. It's within reach. The octopus's eye follows her every movement. "I won't hurt you, dear." One of its free arms taps the floor like a house cat's tail. As she yanks the plug, the octopus flinches backwards. Tova flinches too. She expects him to slink out along the wall toward the door, in the direction he'd been straining. But instead, he slides closer. Like a tawny snake, one of his arms slithers towards her. In seconds, it winds around her forearm, then twists around her elbow and bicep like a maypole ribbon. She can feel each individual sucker clinging to her. Reflexively, she tries to yank her arm away, but the octopus tightens his grip to the point where it's almost uncomfortable. But his strange eye glints playfully, like a naughty child's. Empty takeout cartons, misplaced trash can. Now it makes sense. Then, in an instant, he releases her. Tova watches, incredulous, as he stalks out the break room door, suckering along on the thickest part of each of his 8 legs. His mantle seems to drag behind him, and he looks even paler now. He's moving with effort. She hurries after him, but by the time she reaches the hallway, the octopus is nowhere to be seen. Tova drags a hand down her face. She's losing her faculties. Yes, that's it. This is how it begins, isn't it? With hallucinations about an octopus? Years ago, she had watched her late mother's mind slip away. It started with occasional forgetfulness, familiar names and dates elusive. But Tova does not forget phone numbers or find herself searching the back of her mind for names. She looks down at her arm, which is covered in tiny circles, sucker marks.
Can you hear me? I'm gonna put animals in my next book. My paperback comes out in January. I'm like, maybe we could just add a dog. So good. Well, let me talk to you a little bit, and then I'll find my page. But so this book is about my son. His name is Christopher. He's my second born, and we call him Tofs. And it's hard because a lot of people think he's telling them that his nickname is Toast. But he's been Tofs almost since he was born. It just fits him. And this is a real, the designer actually took a picture of him, a photograph that I gave her of him flying off a picnic bench because he used to love jumping. And so I'm just so great. Yeah, it's him like in a little hoodie and little Pumas on. One of my favorite memories. So anyway, this book is somewhat sad and hard, but also really, hopefully, filled with joy and moments of Tofs, who is still, I don't know if any of you listen to like hip hop or R&B, but he's really into like Earth, Wind and Fire now and Doja Cat, and we got an Alexa, and so he'll be like, Alexa, play the clean radio version of Doja Cat. And then like it comes on because Alexa's just like, okay, and then like she drops the F-bomb, and I'm like, that is not clean, sir. But he has always loved music, and that's part of what's in the book. But the book opens with Tofs. He's just under 2 years old, and he's woken up, and he sort of just woke up and stared. And he's just quiet. He doesn't call for us. My husband just sort of found him in his crib, picks him up, and gives him to me. And I'm like, I have a preschooler who's older than him at the time, his big sister. And so I'm sort of like, I'm in that mode of having like a double stroller, 2 little ones. And so I'm like, okay, I'll just, pull him close. We'll have a quick nap. But when he wakes up, he just like is like, his heart seems like it's beating out of his chest. And I'm sort of like, am I imagining this? Am I overreacting? Which I ask a lot as a mom. And he just drinks and like just drinks so much water. He won't eat, which is unusual. And finally, I put him down to change his diaper, just like on our family room floor, and he falls asleep again. And so I kind of look at my husband, who's more practical and sort of rational, and I'm like, I think I need to call the doctor. And they see us, and what we end up finding out hours later is that his blood sugar had dropped to 27. And so we rush him to the hospital in Charlottesville, and they're waiting for us, which is always like a weird feel, like nobody waits for you at the ER. You have to wait. And someone calls out, like, why isn't he seizing? Because at that level, it can be really dangerous. And so this story, part of it, what drives it is this sort of medical mystery narrative, like what's going on with my son. We start to learn more things, like he doesn't quite seem to always follow, like when I'm trying to talk to him and I'm thinking, is he understanding me? Like his hearing is okay, but is he comprehending? And we start to find out he has like a receptive and expressive language disorder. So it's not just this sort of glucose. And it just seems like, when somebody like pulling those scarves out, and it seems like every test we do, part of it will be normal, like, oh, he doesn't have this and he doesn't have this. And you're like, okay, I'm thankful for that. But there's always something sort of abnormal there that's highlighted. And so we've been to a lot of doctors and a lot of specialists. And at this point in my book, it's part of my favorite chapter. It's sort of in the middle of the book, and we finally have gotten into the developmental pediatrician, who I think is like gonna solve everything, because I'm like, this doctor, he knows about your mind and your body. So like, if we just show up and the kids act okay, like we'll get our answer. Give me 1 second to find it. I think I've given you all the names. The doctor's name in the book is Dr. Perry. Tofs, you know. Elliot is my daughter, the oldest one, and Paul is my husband. When Dr. Perry entered wearing slacks and a button-down, he carried a small black case that resembled a mini backgammon board. Somehow I believed everything we'd need was packed inside. He sat down, opened the case, and asked Tofs to put the various pieces into place. In the notes, he wrote that Tofs could, quote, reverse the form board. I can't remember exactly what he grabbed next. Was it a plain white piece of paper or a small dry erase board? And thankfully, I didn't know the gravity of the test until it was over. He drew a horizontal line. Can you draw this for me? He asked. Tofs did. Then he drew a vertical line. How about this? Tofs's lines were shakier, fainter, made with a fisted grip, but they were there. Well, that's good news, Dr. Perry said. The fact that he was able to copy those lines means his intelligence is at least on the low side of average. Had he just handed us a life vest or shot a hole through our boat? He finished examining Tofs in about 10 minutes and then sat Paul and me down while Tofs and Elliot played. When I look at his records, the poor growth, carnitine deficiency, history of hypoglycemia, and now global developmental delay, he's got something. We're just not smart enough to figure it out yet. Something global, yet. This wasn't a fluke. Tofs had stumped the best. I processed this much before the tunnel started to narrow. Given your levels of education, he's certainly an outlier. Outlier. I think he should see genetics again for whole exome sequencing. And he should have every new wave of genetic testing that becomes available. Science is moving so fast, and what we don't know now, we might know in 10 years. Maybe one day somebody in Europe will discover the Christopher syndrome. Every new test, Europe, my boy, as a syndrome. And then, as the conversation wound down, if he were my son, I'd go ahead and schedule a brain MRI. As I sat across from Dr. Perry, I heard outlier as a painful marker of deficit. What did it mean that our son looked small but fine on the outside, yet was struggling to communicate, to understand? What if he was lonely or frustrated or scared and couldn't tell us? What if the world was closed off to him in ways it remained wide open to me? This type of limitation was not what I'd imagined for my child, and the painful path between mystery and atypical, which is really no path at all, was not the one I thought I'd travel. The first time I heard the term liminal, I was 18, sitting in an African American Studies 101 class at the University of Virginia. A tall and slender Professor Penningroth, his complexion, like my mother's relatives, had written the words "middle passage" in the center of the blackboard. He walked us through not just the number of black bodies taken or the number of years over which they were stolen, but what it might have been like to be yanked into a void, to live or die between what was and what would be. Liminal comes from the Latin word for threshold, when your life, your customs, your expectations are ripped away, as in the case of slaves, or if they disintegrate through grief and mystery. You stand at this threshold. On one side, I see the disintegration of my assumptions about myself, motherhood, and children. In the space between, the space of not yet, I tread water while going to doctor's appointments and Googling, while noticing illnesses or quirks or developmental delays, while waiting for the one doctor on the right ship to come scoop us up from the depths. On the other side, who knows? I'd always assumed the other side was an answer, a new set of boundaries, a new territory to navigate and accept. I'm not sure I would know the other side now if it slapped me in the face. How do you recognize the thing you're looking for when it has no name, no shape? Someday, someone in Europe. This space can be relentless in its power to hold my imagination captive, to dash what's beautiful and true to pieces. Because as I sit across from the doctor and hear Outlier, as I push off into the deep, I do not think about the way Tofs wakes up early one morning to put together a puzzle all by himself, nor how he intuitively cups my face in his hands and gazes into my eyes. I cannot yet know he is capable of ordering a metal yo-yo off Amazon without any instruction. He also ordered $500 worth of leather bags from Amazon. One was white with fringe. It was not for me. Because Toast will think about and do things we would never think of or be able to do at such a young age or ever. Outlier. Somehow these truths deserve to make it to the other side, even if my hands are heavy with doubt. Moses instructed the Israelites to remember the words of the God who had delivered them from slavery. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. If the great doctor never comes along in his great boat, if I never get to the other side, I want someone to find me. I want them to see every dream for Toph stamped across my forehead, the names of his gifts written on my forearms. Thank you.
Thank you. I was so excited to sort of hear what you each chose as the section to read, and I'm so happy that you all got to have a little taste of these wonderful books. Now I am going to be a fangirl and tell you some of my favorite parts and maybe get you to just respond briefly with a little context. Jennifer, there is a scene in Marrying the Ketchups where you do this wonderful social commentary on the different suburbs around Chicago and sort of the personalities of each community. And you have a scene where one of your characters, Jane, is taking her daughter to a birthday party. And she's sort of fed up with this over-the-top birthday party culture for these little girls. And this part made me laugh out loud. Finally, thank the good Lord, it was time for the main event. One of the party planners stood at the end of the red carpet with a microphone and began to introduce each girl, and I think they're like 7, asking what they were wearing and what they wanted to be when they grew up. 2 girls said they wanted to be a Kardashian, and 3 others said they wanted to be on YouTube. They didn't even specify what they wanted to do on YouTube, which shouldn't have been the thing that bothered Jane, but she found it to be a lazy answer. Would you just speak briefly to how you use humor in your writing? Because your books are funny, but they're not just funny. The funny is helping us get to something really meaningful.
One of my favorite parts about writing is just gathering stuff along the way. And it was my friend's sister-in-law. We were on a trip, and she had just taken her child to a birthday party that was a red carpet-themed birthday party. And people, I think, start to get scared. Actually, at our table last night, someone said, they looked at me and Mary Laura, and they said, "Don't write about this," which of course meant, like, I'll take a note and we'll talk about it later. But I wrote that down, it stuck in my head, and I did really want to use it, and this seemed appropriate. The other thing, I am from the Chicago suburbs. Something that happens when you write is you sort of forget that people are going to read it. And when it came out, this one suburb that I talk a lot about, maybe not in the best light, I don't know. And so it was funny when this came out, but yeah, it was just a scene I really wanted to use, and I wrote it, and it was one of the first things I wrote for the book, and I just knew this was gonna be, she's feeling really on the outside of this town that she lives in, and I thought, what better way than to send her to a child's red carpet birthday party.
I love it. I love it. Shelby, this was a little bit that I loved in Remarkably Bright Creatures. Tova's walking around where she works, where she cleans at this aquarium. And you write, Tova has always felt more than a bit of empathy for the sharks with their never-ending laps around the tank. She understands what it means to never be able to stop moving, lest you find yourself unable to breathe. Oh, I love that. Can you say a little something about how communing with animals helps Tova, but also maybe, I don't know, you, anybody, get through some of the things we go through in our human existences.
Yeah, I mean, so that's, I mean, it's really a statement about grief, right? Like, it's just, Tova has spent her whole life sort of outrunning this emotional thing. She lost her son when he was a teenager and has never had closure of knowing exactly what happened. And through the years with her family, she's really kind of pushed everyone away. And I think now in her 70s, she finds herself in this situation where she feels like her only option is to just keep running away from it. And that's why she keeps herself so busy. And it's funny because that image of, if you've ever been to an aquarium, you'll see, you know, particularly like at Georgia Aquarium was where I spent a lot of time when I was writing the early parts of this. I have this big, huge tank. It has the stingrays that are kind of famous, it has like turtles, sharks. If you sit there long enough, you see the same animals come by in, like, they have their track that they go on. And I remember that just sticking with me as like kind of a sad thing, but also just kind of like a commentary on how we get into these grooves and these ruts and how difficult it can be to break out of them. In the book, I also gave Tova a cat to help her. You know, Marcellus is sort of her main animal friendship that really shakes her up and gets her to start rethinking her place in her community. But I also wanted to give her a cat because that's very much me. Like, my cats, I'm a cat person. I talk to my cats. They are my writing buddies that, you know, I tend to write at night, so they're usually kind of like there just watching me with this like slightly judgmental cat look on their face. But yeah, I think it's, you know, there's nothing quite like animals are just sort of there for you sometimes, and they don't ask anything of you other than your presence and your, you know, to kind of your kindness, really. And I think that's what Tova needs is, you know, all the people in her life are always trying to fix her. And so when she starts having, you know, this relationship with Marcellus and with this cat, you know, she realizes the value in just having someone who just listens.
I love that. Taylor, you and I have talked offline about how much I relate to your book on so many levels, but especially this bit. You wrote so much about Toph's challenged the rewiring of my brain I had worked to accomplish through therapy. If a scary automatic thought invaded, finding ways to disprove it wasn't so simple. Sometimes I found too much evidence to support it. And I feel that deep in my bones because I am somebody who, I tend to believe that I keep all the planes in the air with my mind by worrying about them. Can you
Make sure you focus on mine today.
Right. Could you talk a little bit about sort of the push and pull of the story that anxiety tells you and the story that is unfolding in reality in front of you?
Yeah, I think, so I have generalized anxiety disorder. I was, you know, diagnosed as a teen, and, you know, then it was a lot of like panic attacks and things that really kept me from being able to function well at school. And one of the things I learned in cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'm gonna, you know, this is a broad thing, so don't quote me too hard on this, but, you know, sort of I would have these irrational thoughts. Like, I remember being in chemistry class, and it was something like, you know, the automatic sort of negative thought was like, I'm going to die, like, before I leave school today. Something about, I think it was something like the Bunsen burners and the smell, like, it's like, it could happen. But I had a lot of these sort of irrational thoughts, and I think what's difficult is, so what's great about therapy is it sort of teaches you to walk through those thoughts and like, what are the chances that this is gonna happen, Taylor? And generally I could be like, okay, after I talk through this and I rate it and I write down my symptoms, you know, that wasn't that likely to happen. And if it could, we could call 911 and we could do X, Y, and Z, and there's this plan, right? And it sort of takes you back down and grounds you. So extremely helpful. But then you just start looking at things with Tophs and you're like, well, what are the chances that nobody's gonna find out what your kid has going on? And I'm like, those chances are probably pretty small. And so you have to sort of like rework it. So like what I learned in therapy, I still do have irrational thoughts, and sometimes things can be really hard and mysterious, and that's life, and that's very realistic and rational. And I'm sure that existed as a teen and up through my 20s, but it really came to light with TOEFs, that yes, this therapy does help, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everything works out in the end. There isn't necessarily an answer. And so, now what that looks like is trying to decide where to send him to school. And am I being rational about, some of it is just like, is he in the right school? What if he eats lunch alone? What if he's on the playground alone? What if kids, and so there is still some of that, right, that I probably don't need to worry about as much. And then there's this other side of like, oh, he had a seizure. He seems to be well controlled on this medication, but is there a chance he wakes up at 5 a.m. again and is hovered over our bed seizing? There is that chance. And so that's what the last several years have been like for me.
It's hard to tell yourself not to do the what if thing. If the what if happened once,
Right.
you just need once to tell your brain, like, see, you need to go through all the what ifs all the time. Annie, there's so much going on in your book, and I mean that in the most complimentary way. It was almost hard for me to pick out a favorite part, but in the end, I decided I'm going to read this little tidbit, and then I would love for you to give context as to who the people are and why this tidbit comes up. Emma, our main character, who she mentioned, has come home to her hometown. She's left medical school. Emma thinks there wasn't a name for it, the death of a best friend who wasn't your friend anymore, someone whom you hadn't been able to help in the end. There was no name for that mixture of grief and guilt and shame. But here was a name. It was Terry. Will you tell what Terry is and who gave her Terry?
Terry is a little rubber frog. So just to go back to this book being hard to describe, all of us, I think, probably try not to read Goodreads reviews because, people say nice stuff, people say not nice stuff, and you should say whatever you want, but we don't need to read them. But I can't help myself sometimes. And sorry. Taylor's going to yell at me later. The best Goodreads review that I read in my book was like, this book is like watching an episode of Chopped and being like, tuna and chocolate? How are they going to make that work? And then it works. So I am glad to that person for giving me that gift. So Terry, one of the things that happens in the book is Emma, the one who is born with a slight magic touch, who's dropped out of med school, comes home to her small town, and she's got her tail between her legs. She's feeling like a total failure, and feeling like such a disappointment in the way that I think that many 20-somethings feel like a disappointment. The life is over. And then, people who are a little bit older than you are laughing at you because they know, your life is only just beginning, but it doesn't feel that way. Didn't feel that way to me, I remember at that stage in my life. So she comes home and she gets a job as a substitute teacher for a group of 5th graders. And one of them has lost a friend to leukemia, and every day she puts a little rubber frog that she gets from the dollar store on the gravestone, because her friend loved frogs. And the book is narrated by the cemetery. It's like an Our Town narration, like Greek chorus that pops up, and there's a line in there that I do love. And there's little rubber frogs on one gravestone and another ghost in the graveyard. It's like, it looks like the frickin' rainforest over there, So then the gift is she's given, it's a gesture from the student to connecting with the teacher, and it brings them together in this moment of like, we've both lost a friend in this different way, and the student has, at this point, she's the smartest student in the class and has been skeptical of Emma's abilities as a teacher. So it's a real healing moment. And my agent did get me my own Terry. she gave me a frog that she ordered. You know, you order from Etsy and it comes from like Bulgaria. So she was like, it's gonna be late. But it came with a sign that said, my name is Terry, and it's to my desk.
I love it. Okay, I want to give you all a chance to ask questions of our guests. I also have a bag of questions if you're feeling quiet, and I'm going to pass the bag to them and let them question each other. But first, anyone with a burning question who wants to be the first one to put a hand in the air? Okay, we're going to go. Oh, all right, yes. I'm repeating the question just for our people who are listening in from afar. The question for you is, how much research on octopi did you do?
Well, octopuses, actually, believe it or not, is the preferred scientific term. So I did quite a bit of research. A lot of it was internet research. I think when I was drafting this, I don't think I ever believed that it would actually get published. So, I just was kind of writing and, doing my little Google searches. And so I sort of took a ask for forgiveness rather than permission approach. I had a friend who's a marine biologist read a lot of the sections. I had asked some questions of some folks who work in actual octopus rescue on some of the logistics. But yeah, I learned a lot. And the internet is awesome if you want to learn about octopuses. People say that cats rule the internet, but octopuses are number 2. There's some great videos out there and articles, especially lately. I feel like it's really picked up in the last couple of years. So if you have an afternoon where you just want to go down an internet rabbit hole, I encourage you to use Google and octopuses.
Yes. Any more Marcellus?
I don't think so. Not as of right now.
Yes. Writing for a certain genre or thinking about creating your own genre?
I just write what amuses me, so, or haunts me, kind of both those things. Like I'm trying to solve death and make myself laugh. So I don't think about genre when I'm writing.
Yeah, I think, and I think Andy and I are in this genre together. We've talked about it. Our genre is just slightly weird stuff. I read a lot of Kevin Wilson. I read Jason Mott's hell of a book where there's just these kind of weird unsolved things that are going on that may or may not be sort of fantasy or supernatural. But, the characters in the book itself is mostly sort of grounded in our world and in reality.
If there were a section of the bookstore called Slightly Weird, I would spend all my money there. That's my favorite. Taylor, I'm going to hand you the bag of questions, and here's how it works. You reach in, you pull out a little folded up question, you answer it yourself. Aww. Yeah. And then you ask one other panelist to answer it. So reach into the bag of questions.
This is a lot for somebody with anxiety, Mary Laura.
I know. I'm pushing you to your limits today.
Could you tell us about a draft you threw out? A character or scene you deleted or something you tried that didn't work? I'm the whole first draft, my friend. No, but this is good because honestly, with the anxiety, part of it for me is just I had an editor her name's Julie Button. She's fantastic. Yes. She edited Nicole Chung's book, and Nicole connected me. And Julie sort of intuited who I was. And so she just kept telling me, Taylor, get the words down. Taylor, just get through a draft. Don't be the writer who also goes back and edits each paragraph. And that is one of my struggles and temptations. And so I did. I finally just got the words out, and I sent it to her. I remember it was December, and it was okay, once I get through, this is before the pandemic, so I was still just operating in a coffee shop. And I sent it to her and closed my laptop, and I remember feeling okay, I did something. And she was so kind when she wrote back. But that the way that an editor is kind and also whoa, this needs a lot of work.
Did it start this is a good start.
And
There's
then,
a
like,
lot of good stuff here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good
And
stuff here.
she would always be like somewhere in the mess of like critique. It would be like, and you are just so brilliant. So yeah, that first draft was tough, and I'm so thankful she stuck with me. The structure now looks completely different than it did then. And yeah, it was from the time I got the book deal with a proposal to finish, it was like 3 years, and in that time was that pandemic. So it was a lot, and I'm so thankful to her. Jennifer, I'm gonna ask you, what did you throw out?
So many pages. I have always been, the first book I ever tried to write, I couldn't finish because I kept going back to edit. So then I took the approach, like, just write it, figure it out later, which has worked until this one. I was writing it during the pandemic, and I think I was just a little out of it, but I would be like, here's 30 pages, and it's a rotating POV through the restaurant. The food has a point of view. My editor was like, what's happening? And are you okay?
The food has a point of view.
And you cannot have 30 narrators in this book. And so there was a lot that I cut out. I'm just glad I didn't know I was going to cut it at the same. I mean, there's just whole things that are really lifted out, which is okay. And I'm trying not to do it this time, but we'll see. It's the best. Each new book is just lies you tell yourself, where you're like, you know what? I know I usually write 10 drafts, but this draft is going to get it.
All you have to say is, you just have to be like, this is really gonna help someone. Yeah. And then it's like, anything goes.
Each new book is just lies you tell yourself, is the takeaway quote. Other questions? Yes.
So we were talking with the author last night, and she told us that she writes every morning at 4 a.m. So I was just really curious if you could share your writing practice or discipline, and if it's changed over the years.
Writing practices and disciplines. Anybody start? Annie, you want to start?
So pre-pandemic, I had said, the 5 a.m. Writers Club, I would rather never write another book than join it. Then the pandemic hit. I had an 8-month-old. I had no babysitters anymore, and so I did start getting up at 3:30 in the morning. And so this book is crazy for a reason.
Yep. I do not write at 3:30 in the morning. I'm so impressed. I almost just thought about lying. I'm like, we could all lie.
No, I get up at 1:30. I get 45 minutes of sleep.
I am not a morning person, so I'm more likely to do a late night writing, but I try to time, color block. I really like office supplies, so I have some color stickers. They help. And I usually block out 11 to 2 is my golden hour. The coffee is kicked in, but there's not too much to distract you. I do it at different times, but that's what I try for the most, because it's, I think, when my brain is at its peak.
Yeah, if I'm writing at 3:30 a.m., it's because I'm still up from the night before on some sort of crazy mind binge. Which has happened a couple times. I'm a night person, a night writer. I think I have a hard time with, and there's probably some element of anxiety or something to this, just the feeling that there's a backstop. So when I try to write in the morning, I'm just sitting there thinking about my kids are gonna be up in an hour. And I'm not very good about just seizing that hour. My mind kind of spins on the fact that, even if I manage to get myself into you guys maybe know that zone that you hit once in a while, where it's just everything is flowing and it's great, and I'm gonna be so mad if I hit that zone and then my 5-year-old wants cereal. So I tend to write at night, I think, because I can keep going. All I lose is sleep, and that's what coffee's for.
I'm I've heard about that zone. I've gotten close. Let me tell you, I'm not good about schedules. I'd be like, well, I'm not a morning person. Then I'd be like, well, I'm not really a night person anymore. And then I'd be like, around 1 p.m. I could use a nap. So my schedule isn't great, but what's really helpful, I can resonate with the office supplies. My husband, Paul, is just a great dude, and he got the kids in on it, and they painted like a dry erase wall in our office, and that has really been life-changing. We moved, and I need a new one, Paul, if you're listening. But it was so helpful because for me, it's just like I'll be like on the Peloton or doing something and have this idea, and I need to be able to like plot it there. And then as the day goes on, I'm like, well, this is related, but a different idea. And then like I grab another, like I grab the lime green marker and I write something else. And so for me, that's my way of outlining. Like if you tell me to sit at a computer and do an outline, it's not gonna be very good. But if I can like sort of put it on this wall and see it, and then throughout the day and the week think about it and come back to it and find what's really important, that for me worked.
Can I add one more thing to that? Just
Yeah.
because I think you hear a lot of the extreme stories of like, this is how I have to write. And I do have an extreme story for this book, but I teach these accountability workshops of getting people to like get into their creativity. And it's never about like, how can I do a boot camp thing? It's just about consistency. So that's why 5 a.m. Writers Club works for people, because it's something to commit to and be consistent. But it doesn't, like, if you can get as much sleep as you need, then and work later in the afternoon, like do that instead. That's better.
Yeah.
What book or books inspired you to write?
Inspiration from other books. What do you got?
I have two answers that are different. The Catcher in the Rye was a big, like in my life, was a big influence because I really liked the voice part of it. And I think that kind of blew my mind that I was like, well, you can write like someone's talking to you. And then everything Judy Blume has ever written. I love her, which I think is what I said when I met her. I love you. And she was like, yeah. She was used to it. She took it gracefully, yeah.
I will echo what Annie said earlier. I think John Irving is probably my favorite writer, both to study as a writer myself and also just to read for pure pleasure. I remember, reading his books when I was in my 20s was the first time I had a spark of like, wow, like these characters just come off the page in a way that I've never read another book that did that. And that has always kind of stuck with me.
I was a bookseller, and so I like try to read a lot, and I just find that just keeping reading. I mean, there are like John Irving definitely. It was a big inspiration for this book, but just I'm inspired by like whatever I'm reading at the moment. In some ways, like I'm obsessed right now with many people have probably read this book, but Fleischman is in Trouble. Because it does some fun things with narration, and it's funny, and it's like that, keeping myself, like making sure that I'm reading is the thing that makes me want to go write, because I'm really like, feel like we're all in a fun club together.
I was really inspired while writing this by Yaw Jesse's Transcendent Kingdom, and I loved her first novel, but the structure of Transcendent Kingdom, like, it really just blew open these boxes I had about narrative and chronological order and how am I going to write this book? It can't just be medical appointment after medical appointment. There's more to this story. And I never thought I would get my answer from a novel. I honestly think I'm drawn to memoir, but I think I just needed a break from it. And so I picked up her book. And she talks about, the other thing is she brings so much to bear. Like, what is that book about? I don't know. She talks about grief. She talks about science. She talks about faith and, like, just everything. And I love that sort of approach. Like, woven into this main narrative is all these other threads.
She's a tremendous writer. We've had her here at the festival before, yeah, for her first book, for Homegoing.
I love you, y'all.
If you're out there, we love you. Let's tell you what, Taylor, will you pass the bag to Shelby? Shelby, pull out a question.
Here we go.
Answer it yourself and ask someone else.
The most meaningful, funny, or weird reader interaction you've had?
I was hoping it would be that one.
I'm going to go for meaningful, even though it's tempting to go for funny or weird. The week that my book came out, I was at a Barnes and Noble doing just signing their stock at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and the store was pretty empty, and a woman came in looking to buy my book. And of course, all of their stock copies were up at the counter because I was signing them. So the bookseller was like, "Oh yeah, well, here you go. And also, this is the author." And so, I signed her book, and we were chatting. And she was buying it for Mother's Day for her like 90-something-year-old mom, who hadn't read a book in a long time, but she had heard about my book and thought that it might be something that her mom could read. And it just was like we were all crying in Barnes and Noble at like 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. And that's something really unexpected. I knew that I was writing a book that had characters from different generations, but hearing about how it has brought different generations together has been just unbelievably special to me personally. I will ask Taylor.
Oh, okay. I feel like are you good? Because I feel like you've got stories.
Oh. Or whoever.
You got something?
Are you passing the question?
well,
You
I
can
can-
do that. I didn't
I can
say you
look
could.
in her eyes and tell.
Do it, Annie.
I have a funny one. I was visibly pregnant, and I read from this book. Actually, I think I read the deer scene. So I read what I read to you, and the book was not out yet. It was a work in progress. And a woman came up to me afterwards, and she just said, "You have the temperament for natural childbirth."
She got that from your reading. It's amazing.
I'm so glad I asked.
Okay, we're going to take one more question from out here. Yes? Go ahead. For Taylor. Dialogue and memoir.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the school of like, you give it like you just let the reader know, like it's recreated, right? So it's not going to be perfect. There was a lot of research that went into this book, but it was more looking over medical records. There were some things I wanted to get exact if I could, and some of those things are quoted or they're italicized to sort of flag it for the reader that like, no, this is word for word. But other than that, it's really, for me, it was the sense that comes through, that it's true and that it's authentic. So there's nothing in there that didn't actually happen. Is it worded exactly, if I had a recorder and played it back, would it be word for word? No, but everything I asked those doctors, or every time I turned and looked at my husband, I was like, sort of, am I doing the right thing? Like that sense is real, right? And that's authentic to our relationship.
I love that question. I found that I had a lot of text messages I could go back to when I was trying to, recreate conversations that happened back and forth, but that also had happened in text. Thank goodness for iPhones. Okay, I'm going to tell you what is going to happen next. You all are going to go walk up the hill to the big book tent, and you're going to buy all these books. And you are going to then meet these people at the signing tent. We're going to take a little picture. They are going to walk with my friend Amy, wait, there she is, up to the signing tent. They'll meet you there. If you have more questions, if you want to tell them about your own favorite octopus experience, what have you, talk about all the people you know in Chicago, you can do that. I will see you again, if you would like, at 1:30 in War Memorial Auditorium. I will be there to talk about my book, Bomb Shelter, with my dear friend and neighbor, Margaret Wrinkle. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you to Humanities Tennessee, to all our volunteers and sponsors.